so the next article that we came across was the rise of third-party attacks. And so basically a quick synopsis of this was that the fact that businesses around the globe are experiencing major concerns over the impact of the supply chain attacks when it comes to cyber attacks on the supply chain, and how much they think that these attacks are going to increase over the coming years. They've started to see a definite increase in in these types of attacks, along with ransomware attacks, along all over in the Asian Pacific area, and what that really means to us as a business and global community. What does that really mean to us? And so that's one of the things that I wanted to tackle in this conversation piece on this article. But I'll kick it to you to start off on your thoughts on this piece first.
Oh, sure. I look at, in a lot of cases with ransomware attacks, to strictly be a people problem. Well, not 100%, but a lot of with people problem, because where do most ransomware type of attacks come from? It comes through email. It comes from, you can have the greatest filters in the world that still will get something through the filter. Something will get through. The tactics that they are using to try to do phishing campaigns and that stuff are evolving to try to get somebody to click the link, to open the attachment. So I look at that, a lot of that as a people problem. And part of it, the article even said here, it takes an on average 146 hours to detect an incident of this nature. Imagine what can happen in 146 hours with all the automation and stuff that goes into place. So this needs to become, I think we have a very short, I don't want to call it a short attention span. We're very quick to go through things, so people aren't as cautious. That's the reason why I know you preach repeated micro training, regular training on regular intervals. I mean, I've been involved, personally, where it's like, hey, you get your once a year cyber awareness training. And instead it's like, no, don't make anybody, including me who knows the stuff, sit in a room for 8 hours to go through your annual training so I can get my PDF certificate to shove in an employee folder, for instance. This needs to be regular throughout the day. The people need to be diligent throughout the day. So that's my first thought, as far as that.
It's interesting because I read the article from a completely different lens, and I looked at it from the vulnerability and the proof of how vulnerable our global supply chain is. That's the perspective that I've read this article in. I was like, all right, well, how does that apply to me? I was like, I'm reading this article, great. Over in the Asian Pacific, they're having issues. Everybody's having issues with cyber attacks and having to deal with ransomware. What does that mean to me? Why should I care? And as I thought about it, and I looked at it from that lens, you know, COVID and this whole pandemic has shaken our supply chain. I mean, right now we're seeing prices on the shelves go up because of not being able to get goods sitting at ports and not being able to get delivered. We have all these supply chain issues that everybody's scrambling trying to figure out how to make it work. I've heard the other night where there's organizations that are trying to convince the White House to not push through with this mandate because they're afraid of losing a bunch of truckers with this 100 employee mandate. They're afraid of losing truck drivers, and we already know truck drivers aren't there as it stands right now. I mean, as part of the supply issues that we're facing. So we've already got supply issues here in the US. And so then we look at, okay, well, how does this Asian Pacific uptick in cybercrime and ransomwares impact us? And I'm like, well, if I pick up anything and I look at the bottom of it, it's gonna made in China, made in Taiwan, it's made over in the Asian Pacific. It's not made here. So if it can't get here because their production was shut down because of a cyber attack, ransomware, or a hack, or what have you, if they can't produce it, they can't get it here, then that's even going to further weaken our supply chains over here. And I thought it was interesting. Once again, I tell people all the time, cybercrime is big business. It was a $2 trillion industry last year. $2 trillion. So
Well,
this is big. This is big business.
the additional extortion fees averaged $792,000, according to the survey on the ZDNet. I forget who actually produced that. Do you think? Do you think the last couple of years, as these types of attacks, the ransomware attacks that are shutting stuff down, more frequently, are starting to grab more headlines like this? That people are stopping to think about necessarily geographic borders. I know this talks about Asia Pacific specifically, but thinking more in terms of that interlocking interactions with people. They think about. I'm trying to think of a different term besides just supply chain, because I know that gets used a lot now because everything is so slow. But more on strategic. Who are my strategic partners that I have to function with? And if something happens to them, even though they're another business, it directly impacts me and my ability to provide my service and goods going forward because they didn't do something on their line. Do you think we're going to see an evolution of that?
I think we have to, because I think that businesses, if they're not thinking that way, if business leaders aren't looking at it from that perspective, then they need to. Otherwise, they find themselves behind the eight ball in a lot of situations, and being reactive to situations rather than being proactive with them. And so I also think, what I gleaned from this article, because I thought it was very interesting. And hold on, I'm gonna look. So I put the numbers up right. So ransomware payouts in the Asian Pacific are averaging $2.35 million per attack, as opposed to in the US, they're averaging 1.55 million per attack. So even criminals are realizing, one, I can get more money for this, because if I attack the supply chain, especially the global, I'm having global impact now. I'm not just having, impact to just one business. I'm having global impact now. They're attacking industries and resources that are typically deemed as being less secure. So they're attacking them, they're hitting them hard, and they're squeezing every last dime out of them, which I think, from a criminal's perspective, well, from a business acumen perspective, I kind of tip my hat, like, hey, they saw supply and demand. They saw an opportunity, they're taking advantage of it. But from a business perspective, this is what we're dealing with. And as business leaders, if you're not thinking about this stuff, and you're not preparing yourself for these things of what could happen, it's all about risk mitigation. As business leaders, we live and die by the risks that we take. That's the reason
And I
why
think
we're in business.
that's us future looking with discussions I know that we'll have and bring guests on to talk about specifically that. Where is that line of risk mitigation, risk acceptance, risk avoidance? How do you spend the dollars with that? And we will definitely be touching on that.